or any other museum in the world.
In the model of the evolutionary tree, man and apes are said to share a common ancestor. However, evidence of that common ancestor is highly contested. That's why it is still called the missing link. When Darwin's theory of evolution was embraced, it was assumed that in the next century enough fossil evidence would be found to prove that man had evolved from the apes.
Darwinists have promised us a missing link, and so they've got to deliver. They've got to come up with one. Any missing link will do, it seems. Every so often a skeleton is found in Africa. Its discoverers describe it as being the missing link. The headlines come and go, and then later on, that skeleton, those bones are reclassified either as human or as ape. And so far, the missing link is still missing.
One of the most classic examples of this is the story of Java Man, discovered by Eugene Dubois in 1892.
Dubois discovered a very primitive-looking ape-like skull cap, and he discovered this thigh bone about 40 feet away. He said, well, obviously they must belong to the same creature. And that creature walked erect like a human being and had an ape-like skull, so that must be a missing link, the Pithecanthropus ape man. So maybe you had a big ape and a human being living together in Java about 1 million years ago. The important point to make about the Java man discovery is that it's based on a speculative leap in which two pieces of evidence are put together in a way that's not really warranted.
At the end of his life, Dubois realized that the skull cap belonged to a large ape, and the leg bone was from a man. Nevertheless, Java Man was prominently displayed at the Museum of Natural History in New York until 1984. Since then, it has been removed. Today, museums all over the world display models of yet another skeleton they call the missing link, the common ancestor of both man and ape.
Lucy, the famous Australopithecine, discovered by Donald Johanson. He says she was very human-like, but I was at a conference of anthropologists where many of them were making a case that she was hardly distinguishable from an ape or a monkey.
These bones have been restored to resemble a missing link, part human, part ape, and Lucy is now thought of as being our long-lost ancestor. But this is merely an interpretation, the interpretation of one group. Those same bones can be, and they have been taken by scientists, and identified as simply an extinct ape. Nothing to do with us at all.
Newspapers are constantly reporting new discoveries that add to our understanding of man's origins, but so far, conclusive evidence of a missing link has not been found. So what happens to the evolutionary model if the missing link does not exist at all? Without it, there's little support for man's connection with the apes, and the model simply collapses.
Some people have said to me, how can you criticize a theory if you don't have something to replace it with? Well, I don't accept that. If the emperor hasn't got any clothes on, then the emperor hasn't got any clothes on. It's not my fault. It seems to me that if Darwinism is wrong, then somebody has got to point the finger.
Next, we will visit the mysterious city of Tiahuanaco, built at an altitude of 12,500 feet, with stones weighing 150 tons. This could be the oldest city in the world, built by a civilization as yet unknown. In order to unravel the mystery of man's origins, we must follow the path of civilization. Now, civilization is said to have spread from the old world to the new world, but there is evidence that humans were building cities in the new world thousands of years before history tells us. Traditionally, the oldest city in the world is thought to be Jericho in the Old World, dated to around 8000 BC. Yet in South America, the so-called New World, scientists are looking at evidence of a city that could be twice as old. Situated at an altitude of 12,500 feet, Tiahuanaco is one of the most mysterious cities in the world. Traditionally, it's thought to have been built by the predecessors of the Incas 2,000 years ago. However, around the turn of the century, Bolivian scholar Arthur Poznansky began a 50-year study of the ruins of Tiahuanaco. Using the science of astronomy, Poznański came to an amazing conclusion. He calculated that Tiahuanaco had been constructed more than 17,000 years ago, long before any civilization was supposed to have existed. Poznański called this fabulous city the cradle of civilization. Even though the accuracy of Poznański's measurements were confirmed by engineers, his conclusions about the age of Tiahuanaco have never been accepted. Neil Steedy, a Mesoamerican archaeologist, decided to reopen his controversial investigation.
I met with Dr. Oswaldo Rivera, who is head of Bolivian archaeology. The doctor, though he disagrees with Poznański's findings, was more than willing to help in every way possible so that we could retrace Poznański's steps.
Neil visited Dr. Rivera's newest excavation site, the Acapana Pyramid. Today it's mostly in ruins, but the base is miraculously preserved and still testifies to the advanced capability of its builders.
The facing stones of this site are perfectly set with no mortar. We took a needle, and that needle we tried to insert at every point along the joint, and the needle couldn't be inserted. A perfect cut.
One of the most baffling questions for Poznański was why they built Tiahuanaco with such precision. This, he felt, was an important clue to the age of the structure.
Now, the ancients constructed the site with astronomical alignments in mind. As the sun rises each day, it moves along the horizon and arises in a different spot. To measure this movement, they built the temple itself as a giant clock to tell them how the progression of the sun was proceeding. And we can use those same astronomical alignments to date the site.
Poznański observed that on the first day of spring, the sun rose exactly in the center of the temple, through the archway. Based on the layout of the temple, he deduced that on the first days of winter and summer, the sun should rise directly over each of the huge cornerstones. But he found this was not the case. The position of the sun was, for some reason, slightly outside of the corner markers. He wondered what that reason was.
In Tiahuanaco and in the other ancient sites surrounding it, the architecture is perfectly aligned to the cardinal points. The buildings are deliberately oriented to the cardinal points. But if we measure each building precisely, we will find errors. I believe these are simple errors of construction, not at all related to the date of construction.
After observing the perfection with which this site is built, with 100-ton stones, to suggest that such things as the solstice markers are misaligned, I find incredible. No, I think the solstice markers were probably